Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. Hope everyone's doing good. It is a Sunday, beautiful, hot and sunny day here in Mid Coast, Maine. Hope everyone's doing good. Played a really fun show last night with Osmia, which is a new band. I just started playing with them this past December, and it was great. I did a big show on Osmia, and it's been a real interesting journey because well, it's been really unique for me because I did a big show on Osmia and kind of, where I talked about the music and how, I've been a fan of their music for quite a few years. And then things just kind of shifted and changed. And before I knew it, I was, playing in the band. And it was just a real interesting set of circumstances and really, really cool. And just super fun. And the thing is, it for me, I was thinking about it. I was talking to somebody about. I played a show with Osmio last night, and I was talking to somebody about it, about how I started playing in the band, and really unique, really unique. I've never really had that experience of where I was like legitimately a fan of a band, like following a band, and I had seen Osmia play quite a few times, like 4 or 5 times. And then, my band Quantum played a show with them last summer, and just a series of events. And I've been, a big fan of theirs. And they're, based out of Belfast, Maine. All original music, kind of noise rock stuff, shoegaze with a shoegaze style, heavy, melodic, but very emotive, and lots of experimentation. And yeah, it was so I never really had that experience before playing in a band of where I, was a bona fide fan of a band, and then getting a chance to eventually become a member of the band. So really, really great. We played a show last night. We played with a bunch of great like experimental kind of noise groups, which was really, really cool. The only thing that was a little bit of a bummer was like we got there. It was a long day yesterday, but I still had a great time. And the show was at the Marsh River Theater in Brooks, which is a really beautiful theater. I hadn't been to that theater in years, at least, yeah, many, 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 many years. And I had played a couple of shows there years and years ago, and did a musical there. It's a real beautiful theater that sits in downtown Brooks, which is a quaint little Maine town. So the show was scheduled to start 8 o'clock, and I didn't really know going into the show. I didn't really know the order of when we were going to be playing, and I had a friend who had texted me who wanted to come and was asking me about what time we were playing, and I didn't know. So, you know, and the doors opened at 7, and the show was supposed to start at 8, and there was 4 bands in total, 4 groups in total, and we ended up getting there at like I got there about 5, and we didn't end up playing till about like 10:30. So it was kind of a long day, but the music was great. There was a really good crowd. I think by the time we went on, a lot of people left because it was so late, and we got done at about quarter after 11, 11:15 by the time we were done, and that was late. It was a lot of music. I thought the music was really great of a lot of the bands that played, but generally I thought like all the bands probably played a little too long, and there was a big lag in between sets. Like I was hoping it would have been a quicker transition. Everybody was, which was surprising because there was everybody was set up, and everybody had sound checked, so everything was ready to go. So I didn't understand, but anyway, it was still a great show, and it was a pretty long day, but nevertheless, it was totally worth it. So I've done a couple of shows on where I've been talking about the new Superman directed by James Gunn. That's opening, I believe, Friday next week, the 11th. And I have done a couple of shows on Superman. I think I did a show. Well, I did a show on the trailers, my reaction to the trailers. I haven't really been doing. That's a big trend on YouTube. A lot of people do trailer reactions or like out of the theater reactions, and those are good. I think they're viable and they are important because for me, when I see a movie or a trailer, it's like I kind of rely on. I don't really intellectualize it. It's just kind of my gut reaction. But there's a lot of movies out there that when it comes to seeing a movie, sometimes you have to like sit with it for a day or two. Usually, when I see a movie in the theater, I don't do an instant show or an instant reaction video because I really feel like whether your initial experience is really great or it's not really great, that 24-hour period, I think it has to you have to sit with it for a while. It has to ruminate with you. It has to kind of get in your bones a little bit, and then I feel like the next day after you've seen a movie in the theater, if you wake up and you're thinking about that movie, you're excited about it, or you want to talk about it, that's usually, and it stays with you for a while. That's usually for me, a pretty, hearty indication that it was a really great experience. And I generally really either really loved the movie or I really, really liked it. And then a lot of times too, if that over that 24-hour period, you might say you might like it or you think it's kind of fun or you got lost in it and you were like, okay, I can dig this. And then the 24 hours go by and then you wake up and you don't really think about the movie. You're not really wanting to talk about it and you kind of just forgot about it. It just kind of goes on the back burner. It doesn't have any lasting power. So that's usually why I do when I see a movie, particularly in the theater, why I usually wait to see how I'll feel the next day. And of course, it's all subjective. And the same thing with trailers. Trailers in general now are just god awful because they give away the entire film, and I don't know why studios continue to do that. It's probably because of they figure they got to give away as much as they can to pull people in. I have no idea. I think most of the time when 90% of the time or 95% of the time now when studios do that, it ultimately just backfires and kind of destroys the excitement of going to a movie. Whereas trailers, cutting when a movie or director or studio is cutting a trailer, that's very much an art form into itself, and that should give you feelings of being really enticed, excited, curious, and wanting to see it, and not knowing really what it's going to be about, but just enough to entice you. I think that's what trailers are meant to be, or what they should be, but not so often these days. And I did a video of where I talked about my anticipation to see the new James Gunn Superman movie, my initial feelings of it, and then also my thoughts on the second trailer for the new James Gunn movie, and how I really, really want to see it. It's a movie that I'm really anticipating to see. I'm gonna see it. I'm gonna go see it with some friends a week from today, which is Sunday. We're gonna go see it on Sunday. And I talked about seeing the second trailer, and I was really worried about it. Really worried. And you know, there's been a few indications online, and again, it's a lot of there's so much clickbait kind of bullshit on YouTube, but there has been some inklings and ripplings of that this movie is could not be very good. It could be kind of a train wreck. And I have to say, when I saw the first trailer, it looked really awesome, and I was super excited. And then I saw this other trailer, which was slightly longer. I was my reaction was I felt like the rug was pulled from under me, and I felt baffled. I felt really confused, and I felt like, wow, okay, this movie now looks like, although it's a movie. I'm a huge Superman fan, and when I want to talk about, and the universe for Superman is vast and huge, and I wanted to just kind of talk about the movies in the Superman universe that I really really love and that I don't really love, and movies that I don't like at all. But they're, Superman's always been one of my favorite characters, so I wanted to talk about an overall look at all of the animated movies, but then also the live action movies that have come out, all over the years. And so when I first saw the trailer for the second one, I was like, again, I was really confused, I was baffled, and I felt like that there were too many damn characters. There were so many characters on the screen, and it didn't make any sense. Like, it was just really confusing, and it looked like there was so much CGI in this movie that it was just pure overkill. The thing that threw me off the most was, like, I'm a huge Gaiju fan, Japanese Toho monster movies, of course Godzilla and all of the other Toho classic movies. But there's scenes in the new trailer or the latest trailer for Superman of where it's like a Gaiju movie and he is like fighting these like monstrous Superman is fighting these like dragons, and it was like, I don't get it. Like, I don't equate Gaiju and Superman together. Like, it just looked really off and weird. And the CGI didn't look very good. And I was like, what's going on here? And there was an abundance. There was like literally 30 characters on the screen that I had no idea who they were. And I like to think that I know, a pretty good amount about the Superman mythology and its characters. And it was baffling. The only character that I recognized, of course, was Lex Luthor, but there was like 50 other characters in a lot of these scenes. So I'm gonna go see it anyway, but I do not honestly, I don't really have my hopes up too high. Um, and on a positive note, David Cornsweet, who is a really great actor, he is the new Superman. And he's been in a few movies, but the movie that I saw him in, which I thought he was just incredible in, is Pearl. He plays this really kind of complicated, but yet really villainous, kind of terrifying character in Pearl. And Pearl is the second movie in the Ty West trilogy, starring Mia Goth. The first one being X, which is just an amazing film. It's a modern day slasher masterpiece. Pearl was the second one, also starring Mia Goth, and then Maxine, the third one, which came out last year, which is another awesome movie. I love that trilogy to death. I'm a huge Ty West fan, massive, massive Mia Goth fan. And David Corenswet was in Pearl, and he's incredible in this movie. And I did not know who he was, and he plays a very complex kind of character, super creepy, super sinister. And I was like, wow, okay, he is going to be the new Superman. That's pretty interesting. So I looked up, I found this interview with him, and it's a fascinating interview. I mean, he's a Juilliard trained actor. He was in a few Arthur Miller plays when he was in his teens. I mean, which is like insane. He's a serious actor, like his background and his credentials, and so I was really impressed. He's, in this one particular interview I saw with him, he's incredibly intelligent, incredibly articulate, and really just such an interesting actor, such an interesting persona. So that gave me a lot of hope. And of course, that doesn't mean that that's going to make this new James Gunn movie good. I mean, it's kind of out of context, but knowing that this guy, Michael Cornsweet's got these chops, um, and this ability and this background gives me hope. So, the Superman universe is huge, and there's so many movies I have reviewed on this channel. I know I have reviews, individual shows on every Superman movie that is out, and I grew up as my favorite. Of course, Superman is DC. James Gunn is in charge of the new DC universe. This is supposed to be the ushering in of a whole new time period. And, really, I think the stakes are really high for this movie. I think if this movie fails, it's going to be a disastrous beginning for this new kind of unveiling of this new universe. But I think also they will probably still, even like say, I don't know, even say when Superman comes out, say it does, say every review is terrible and it doesn't really, and it is, say it is just a total misfire. I think with all of the money that is behind this entire new universe, and with James Gunn being, at the helm of it all, which is good and really great, but also like disappointing in some ways, just because I wish James Gunn would get back to just being a really great filmmaker, which he is. Making movies like Slither, Super, the first two Guardians, Suicide Squad, his version, which is absolutely amazing. But I just wish he would return to like making movies again, not all of these things that are tied to franchises. So, but that's never going to happen ever. So it's good and bad. But I think even if this movie tanks and is not good and is a shit fest, I think there's so much invested in this movie, they're going to probably crank out these movies regardless. But it could also go the other way. If this movie is, because this new Superman is the new launch pad for probably the next 10 years of movies, which is insane. Uh and if this movie doesn't do well, it could spell complete and utter disaster for where this goes. I mean, that happened. I mean, when you look at an example with like, for instance, Blumhouse, they acquired the rights a few years ago, paid an insane amount of money. They paid the rights to own the rights for the Exorcist movie and the franchise, and they set out with David Allen Green to set out to make a trilogy of new Exorcist movies. And he, of course, came off the heels of the Halloween trilogy that he brought back. And that was, I feel, well, the first two movies are kind of awful. I'm actually a huge fan. I'm such a lone wolf in saying this, and I'm such a separate from everyone else. But I actually really, really, really like or love Halloween Ends. I think that's the only movie in that trilogy that is just original and new and takes a chance, because the franchise really needed that. But all of the two other movies are just, I think, are kind of unwatchable. And that third one tanked. So, but they had Blumhouse, Jason Blumhouse, who owns Blumhouse, and you know took David Allen Green and put him in charge of this new Exorcist trilogy that they were trying to produce. And the first one came out a year or two ago, and that movie was an utter disaster. And then so he was removed from doing any other movies. but they're still going to make them anyway. So, you know, it didn't stop it. It didn't stop the machine, unfortunately. So I don't know. There is a new one coming out, which it's yeah, it's never going to end. But it still deterred, you know, what they were trying to do initially. So we'll see. But that could happen with this franchise. But anyway, I want to talk about the movies that I really love. You know, like as far as the Superman franchise. You know, I think obviously the first live action starring Christopher Reeve, iconic, amazing. You know, I that's one of the greatest movies and one of the greatest comic adaptation movies. Really, the first in history of a live, big budget action, you know, superhero movie. You know, I love that movie to death, and I own that on Blu ray. I have pretty much all of the Superman movies, good and bad, and there's mostly bad, I think, in the mix. But I own all of them pretty much on Blu ray at this point. And my favorite Superman movie of all time is Superman 2, of course, with Terrence Stamp as General Zod. I love that movie. I think that movie is, you know, Richard Donner, the director who created the franchise, who was also, you know, very popular for the Lethal Weapon movies, and he's made some, you know, he was a really great director. The director's cut for Superman 2, the theatrical version that was put out is not very good, but the director's cut is amazing. You know, that was a real problematic film for Richard Donner to make. He was at odds with the studio, and there was all kinds of battles because the first Superman was massively successful, and of course that launched the franchise. But the Donner cut, the Richard Donner cut, the director's cut is amazing, and I that overall it's my favorite Superman movie of all time. And then there was the third one, which Superman 3, which with Richard Pryor, which is absolutely awful. And also, you know, getting back to the first one, of course, with Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. I mean, and Ned Beatty, amazing. But the third one with Richard Pryor is god awful. I watched that movie. I bought this pretty cool box set of all of the Superman movies, all on DVD, but it's actually a really good box set. I got it really cheap, and it's got all four Christopher Reeve movies. And I watched the Richard Pryor one, and I hadn't seen that. I had actually only seen the first two Superman movies were regular movies in my, you know, as a kid in my regular diet of watching, you know, movies. I used to watch them all the time as a kid. But I had not seen. I had actually only seen the Richard Pryor film once or twice, and my God, that movie is such a train wreck. It's unwatchable. The script is terrible. Um, Everything. I mean, they were trying so hard to make. The studio was trying whatever they could to make a movie with nothing. And yeah, that movie is so bad. It's got to be one of the worst sequels, if not the worst sequels that I've ever seen, ever. My second favorite movie, which again is another thing going against the grain in every way possible, is Superman Quest for Peace, which to me is kind of like an exploitation version of a Superman because you know, that Canon put that movie out because they, you know, the big studio that was putting it out basically you know, lost the finances because, you know, because the third one was so bad. Canon took over the project, and Canon, you know, is an amazing kind of low budget, you know, if you will, exploitation company that put out all kinds of just fantastically ridiculous ninja movies, American Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3 Domination. They put out all kinds of fantastic action exploitation movies in the 80s. You know, most notably working with Michael Dudikoff, who was one of the greatest kind of exploitation action stars of that time. I love canon movies so much. They're so awful, they're so cheesy, they're so low budget, but they're so fun. I own quite a few of those movies, and those are some of my favorite 80s movies ever. And I definitely consider them to be kind of in the B movie exploitation kind of genre. And so they took over and they basically put out Quest for Peace, which, all intents and purposes, that movie is complete, and it's dog shit. But it's so bad. Again, I totally believe in the saying, and I've said it many, many times, that I totally believe that something can be so horrendously bad that it's great. And I think Quest for Peace is that. And that movie is my second favorite movie in the franchise. And I might even say it might be my favorite movie in the entire Superman franchise, because that movie is just bonkers bizarre. It's so bad. The low budget nature is like is staggering, and it's just great. It's again, it's so bad it's great. It's so bad it's good. And that was the last movie. That was kind of the final nail in the coffin as far as Christopher Reeve movies. And that movie was a train wreck, but that movie has gone on to become a cult. It's acquired over many years a big, huge cult following. Particularly like people who are into like B movies, exploitation movies, really low budget crap, trash movies, like myself. That movie, Superman Quest for Peace, has gone on to become this kind of cult masterpiece. Other other movies. One movie that I can think of right now that I had a lot of mixed things around it. I kind of liked it, and then I watched it fairly recently again, and I was really, um, well, just bored with it and kind of let down. Mark or Brian Singer, the director for the X-Men movies, he was put in charge of kind of the Superman reboot. They had intentions of bringing back Superman in a modern age, and he directed Superman Returns, starring Brandon Ruth, and that came out quite a few years ago. And Kevin Spacey plays Lex Luthor, and I remember really being excited of seeing that movie when it came out, and I remember seeing that in the theater. And that movie was, I don't know, I think pretty underwhelming. I remember my first reaction when I saw it in the theater. I thought it was good. I like Brandon Ruth actually quite a bit. I think he is an awesome actor. Um, you know, he's been in some really great roles over the years. I think he's pretty underrated. But Returns was just, I don't know, it was good. But I think that movie, well, that movie when it came out, it bombed. It totally bombed in the box office, and it killed any future prospects of them continuing with Brandon Ruth. And he left after there was no other movies made with him in it. And he's gone on to make some pretty cool movies, and is a good character actor. I do like Brandon Ruth. But I thought that movie was okay. It was just kind of underwhelming, and then over the years it kind of grew on me. I own it on. I have a DVD copy of it, and I've seen it quite a few times. And it's one of those movies that I feel like doesn't age well. In all honesty. And again, all of these movies I'm talking about now, I've done videos on each of these movies. So if you want to check them out, you can. But I wanted to kind of just talk about all these movies in one kind of context with a a little bit of a different perspective, mainly in light of going to see the new Superman movie. And I've seen Superman Returns a few times, and I did say I will say that a few years ago that movie was kind of growing on me, and I was like, okay, it's pretty good, it's pretty solid, and that movie was really rejected by the critics. A lot of people didn't like it, and of course it died when it came when it came out in the box office. It totally died. But over the years, that movie had grown on me, and I kind of I arrived at a place of where I felt that movie was a little bit underrated, and it actually is a good movie, and that people and critics, should give that movie another chance. It's actually pretty good, and just kind of one of those things. And then so I hadn't seen it in quite a few years, and then fairly recently, last year, I watched it again, and I've seen it about probably 4 or 5 times, including seeing it when it came out, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It didn't age well to me. It just feels really, yeah. It's got some big, high caliber kind of production, but it's just got this very generic, very predictable, just lukewarm story, and it doesn't really take any chances. It's just kind of there. It's just to me it's just kind of bland. It's just, I don't know. It's got this incredibly big budget, but it just has this, it's just it's just it's just kind of there. It's a really bland, unexciting movie in a lot of ways. Even though I think some of the acting is great, and Brandon Ruth is pretty good in this movie, I just think it's ultimately just it feels undercooked. So I'm not really a fan of that movie, and I don't think that movie really adds anything to the character of Superman. It doesn't really age very well. It's just kind of there. It's not terrible, you know. I mean, compared to the Richard Pryor version, it's a masterpiece, but that's not saying much. And then fast forward, of course, to Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder, starring, and then Henry Cavill was picked as Superman, and he has been Superman technically for a few movies now. I mean, basically, Man of Steel, and then the two cuts of Justice League, and then also the Superman vs. Batman movie. So he's been he's been Superman for quite a few years, if you want to look at it that way from a technical standpoint. And Zack Snyder, for me, I feel like he's one of the most underrated, or underrated, I should say. Zack Snyder, for me, is one of the most overrated directors around. I just feel like I don't get it why so many people shoot their load over his films. He's got this cult base, this cult following that defends him to the will defend him to the end of time, and I don't really get it, because I feel like he's definitely for he's got a super case of style over substance. He's a he I feel like as a director he's a one trick pony. He really knows how to sometimes tell the story visually, but then the screenplay the screenplays for a lot of his stories, the actual finding that chemistry for an ensemble cast, all of those things to me are secondary. And Man of Steel is one of those movies. Like I was really excited about seeing Man of Steel in the theater, and I did see it in the theater. I do like Henry Cavill quite a bit. I think he is an awesome actor. He's been in some really great movies, and I think for the most part he was a a good Superman. But I feel like I remember seeing Man of Steel in the theater, and I was by the end of it, I felt like I had a headache and I was exhausted. I just felt like it was kind of at that point I felt like CGI had reached this apex of where it was just this dizzying um, campaign or onslaught to where it was so over the top to where I wanted to fall asleep. It's kind of like that syndrome, like where you hear where sometimes people drink so much coffee or have so much caffeine that they just crash at the end of it, and that's what that movie was like for me. I felt like Michael Shannon as General Zod, which I love. Michael Shannon as an actor was absolutely flatlined. There was no intensity in comparison to Terrence Stamp as General Zod, who is one of my favorite villains of all time. There was no energy in his character. The stakes were not high. There was no intensity. There was no, um, a lot of the characters, again, were just on screen, particularly with General Zod and his henchmen. They were just on screen. The way they tied in Superman's father and Lois Lane's character was, and what they did with Lois Lane's character was absolutely ridiculous. I thought, and I thought the second half of that movie, where where the battle scene takes place in Metropolis, was it was so over the top that I felt like it was all a blur and there was no emotional quality to it. It was like it was a, one CGI scene after another, but on steroids, and it just was unexciting. There was no use of practical effects. It just everything looked and felt so artificially created to me. And I do own that on Blu-ray, and that's a movie I've seen multiple times. And there's things about that movie I really like about it. I think the first act is really good, but again, it doesn't know. I think Zack Snyder firmly believes in more is more as opposed to less is more. And that movie just is like a CGI like porn fest. And I can't. It leaves me cold, and I just want to take a shower afterwards and go to bed because it's exhausting. I just feel like that movie is exhausting. And then after that there was the Justice League film that came out, which is the first version, the theatrical version, which is absolutely horrible, unwatchable. Again, it's just so unbelievably bad. The Superman versus Batman movie, again, the same thing. I will say I did like Ben Affleck briefly as Batman, but that movie again suffered from the same thing, and the way they introduce the Justice League is absolutely. I felt like it was conceived and written by a 5-year-old. But fast forward, there was a Zack Snyder director's cut for the Justice League, which is 4 hours. That I absolutely love that movie. I think that is easily the best thing that Zack Snyder has ever done. I don't really like any of his other films. I think there's aspects to his films that are really great, but I think they're ultimately just really flawed. 300. There's so many of those movies. I just think it's all about bells and whistles. There's no substance to them. And he just believes more is more. But with the exception of the Zack Snyder Justice League cut, the 4 hour version, which I own on Blu-ray, is awesome. I love that movie to death. I think that is just a riveting, exciting, epic film. I don't know why everything else for me is such a misstep outside of that, but I love that movie. I've done a show on that, And I think Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, the whole cast is incredible. Steppenwolf, the villain, is just super badass. I love that movie to death. And it's for, I think what they did, like, since I'm talking about Superman, what they did with Superman in that film is was incredible. Henry Cavill is amazing. They did something different. They made his character a lot darker. It's really great. It's amazing, and I highly recommend it. Superman versus Batman, the director's cut, I also feel is better, significantly better, but ultimately it still suffers from those same problems on how they introduce the Justice League. I do think it's significantly better though, in a lot of ways, especially the first act, like especially when they introduce Ben Affleck as Batman. It's kind of badass, and I actually do like most of that movie. But Justice League is my favorite. So, it's been really mixed when it comes to the Superman universe for me, big time. Not consistent in any way, shape, or form. Finally, I'm a pretty big fan of a lot of the superhero animated movies. I own most of I own a ton of DC movies, animated superhero movies, and there's two Superman movies that I want to talk about too, which are one being Doomsday, and then the other one being called Death of Superman. And Doomsday is a pretty good movie in a lot of ways. It's pretty solid. But The Death of Superman, based on the graphic novel that came out quite a few years ago, also with Doomsday, is super badass. I love that movie to death. It's really good, and it's my favorite animated version of animated film about Superman. And I believe it's called The Death of Superman, and it's amazing. And of course, centered on his epic fight and battle with Doomsday, and just amazing. I have that on Blu-ray, and it's amazing. I've watched that multiple times. That is absolutely incredible and stunning. The animation is amazing. The intensity, it's incredibly violent. It's just so badass. The stakes are super high. Yeah, it's just amazing. So that's all of the movies as far as I might be leaving one or two out, I guess, but that's all of the movies that I can think of and movies that I own when it comes to the Superman universe, which is huge and vast and, 30 years, 40 years or so. You know, uh, so there's so many movies to talk about, and I wanted to kind of just do a brief kind of, synopsis of all the movies, at least that I own, and my thoughts on all of the movies. And as a quick recap, like Christopher Reeve still to me is the ultimate Superman. Uh, I love the first one, Richard Donner. It's amazing, and my favorite is, well, it's tight. It's a tight race, but I am a huge fan of Superman 2, the Donner cut, Richard Donner, the director's cut. That's amazing. And then also Quest for Peace, as as ridiculous as that movie is, I love that movie to death. After that, everything else is super mixed or not great at all. So it's super. It's super. It's all over the place. You know, and Superman is one of my favorite characters. I was always enamored with him as a kid. I have many of his comic books. Yeah, he's always one of my, character is pretty close to my heart. One of my all-time favorite characters. When I think of the Batman, who is my all-time favorite character, in the Batman universe, there's so much more consistency. You have the Tim Burton movies, the Christopher Nolan movies, with the exception of The Dark Knight Rises, which is just awful. And even Batman and Robin, which is such a campy, ridiculous movie. And I equate that as the same kind of genre as Quest for Peace, where it's so ridiculous and so terrible that it's good. Again, it goes back to my favorite saying: it's so bad, it's good. And my favorite hands down, my favorite Batman movie is the Robert Pattinson movie, which came out a couple of years ago. That's a fucking masterpiece. So, but so in the Batman universe, there's a lot of consistency, and then you have the animated series, which is amazing, and there's so many great animated movies that have come out around the Batman character that are just amazing. And I think with the exception of the Dark Knight Rises, everything else is just like incredible, especially Robert Patterson's Batman. But with Superman, to me, it's not even close as far as the consistency and quality. So I don't know. Going into Superman again, I'm going to see it a week from today, and I will definitely do a review of it. This is a video or show where I've talked a lot about. I've done. This is probably my third video where I've talked about Superman, but there's a lot to unpack. I mean, it's a huge, vast universe, and the character of Superman itself means a lot to me, and I'm a huge fan. So I'm gonna go see it, and obviously I'll do a show on it, whether it's a great experience or a shitty experience. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.